ich weiß nicht, also es... Actually, I'm not yet sure whether I should welcome you because we are still waiting for some of the panelists. So I beg you just to wait for some more minutes.
Good evening, everybody. Schönen guten Abend. It's great to be with us all this evening. My name is Christine Mundwa, and I have the privilege of just making the announcement that our event is about to get underway. Just a few housekeeping rules for us. We are providing simultaneous translation or interpretation in German. So if you would like to hear today's proceedings in German, we've got some devices over there that look very futuristic, fitting with our topic. So if you would like to hear this in German, you can absolutely make use of that. As always, it's so important that our message gets outside of the room, because in many ways, when we're talking amongst ourselves, we're preaching to the choir. So we are using the hashtag BKG24. That's right. So BKG24 for your social media platforms to get the word out there. There is no other housekeeping other than also just to mention that we are live streaming our event. So if you want to share this for somebody who is joining us, perhaps would like to join virtually, that is also possible. Our virtual participants will also be able to take part in question and answers via the means that have been made available. But without wasting any more time, and to officially open our evening, I'd like to invite Dr. Christiane Averbeck. She is no stranger to any of you. She is the Executive Director of the Klima-Allianz Deutschland.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, representatives of the federal government, colleagues from Uganda and Nepal, and from Germany, dear Dagmar Brünn, I'm very happy to welcome you to the 24th Berlin Climate Talk. Climate Justice Needs Financing. It's a format of Klima-Allianz Germany together with Bread for the World. And maybe you don't know it, but Bread for the World is a founding member of Klima-Allianz Germany. So therefore, it's always a pleasure to have such an event with Bread for the World together. As for me, I'm sure you didn't know that, but I was once a dollar trillionaire. For those of you that can't see it, this is a note, $20 trillion. So as for me, I could easily have shifted the trillions, isn't it? Unfortunately, these are Zim dollars. It was in the time of hyperinflation that I used to have this money, or I was using it, and unfortunately it lost its value in 2008. So, I mean, this is what I share with you at the beginning, because what we discuss at the COP in Baku in Azerbaijan is that we need trillions, but of US dollars, for climate justice. We need to negotiate the new finance goal after 2025, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. This is also the topic of what we want to discuss today. We will discuss how the climate financing goal can meet the needs of developing countries. We will explore where the funds must come from to ensure fair financing by those responsible for the climate crisis, and also what role Germany will play when it comes to agreeing on a new climate financing goal. So today we are concentrating on the climate finance, but at the COP also other important topics will be discussed, such as mitigation, loss and damage, and adaptation. And Klima-Allianz Germany, together with the umbrella organization of development and humanitarian non-governmental organizations, it's called FENRO, develop asks addressed to the German government, and they are summarized in this document, which is falling apart. In this document, we only printed it out once, but you can get it through a QR code. You can download it. And I would love to give it to Mr. Gorrison. So I hope that directly the German government will implement everything that we are asking for. I hope this works. You know, this is for the colleagues from Nepal and Uganda. That is how we are working. You know, NGOs with German government. So yes. So yeah, as I said, for others interested, we've got the QR code so that you can also have access to the document. So I wish you us all an interesting discussion, and with this short introduction, I would like to hand over to Dagmar Brünn.
Thank you very much, Christiana Averbeck. I learned so much. I didn't know that it's so easy to influence policy in Germany. So I think after this short introduction, we can already close the evening. Sadly, it's not that simple, but this is the way. Even these things who can maybe change the world, and we owe the world. Dear guests, esteemed representatives of the federal government, I hope that there are some more than Norbert Görresen in the first line, especially our partners from Nepal and Uganda, who passing through their way or thought to pass through their way to the Summit of the Future in New York. I heard these plans are cancelled. I'm very glad you're here. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 24th Berlin Climate Talk. Climate Justice Needs Financing, organized by the Klima-Allianz Deutschland and Vote for the World, Vote for die Welt, and I welcome you in our building here in Berlin. We stand at a crucial moment in the history of climate policy. In just a few weeks, COP29 will convene in Baku, Azerbaijan, to negotiate the new climate finance goal for the period after 25. Establishing this goal is more than a technical or diplomatic exercise. It's a matter of justice and humanity. When we talk about climate finance, we are not just discussing figures. We are talking about human lives, safeguarding livelihoods, and ensuring the right to a decent life for us all. We have all witnessed climate records being broken. Temperatures are climbing to unprecedented levels. Glaciers are melting faster than even before. Sea levels are rising, forcing entire communities to relocate. Extreme weather events, such as storms, droughts, and floods, are becoming more frequent. And let me add also something, being not only the president of Bread for the World, but also of DKH, the humanitarian part of our organization. What really frustrates me is how normal these extreme weathers, also in Germany, also in Europe, seem to be. So for most people, and we can see it very clearly these days, there are the floods already in Eastern Europe. There will be maybe floods tomorrow here in Germany. But many, many people, and we see this as we talk to people, but also we see it in donations, for them it's just the new normal. So all what we witness does not come to an end that people will say, okay, it's here, climate change is real. No, it's just the new normal, and that's really frustrating and dangerous. Because the data is clear, the crisis is clear, the crisis is here. Moreover, far from scientific research, our work with our partners, the partners of Bread for the World, has also clearly shown us how devastating the consequences of climate change are and can be. The poorest people, those least responsibility for the climate crisis, are bearing the heaviest burden. These people are already facing daily challenges caused by hunger, poverty, and the lack of access to basic services like education and health care. Now they are also struggling with the consequences of droughts, floods, the destruction of crops, and the loss of livelihoods. Millions of people have already been forced to leave their homes as these become uninhabitable. They have lost their livelihoods and sometimes even their hope for a better future. Without urgent action, the numbers of displaced people will continue to rise along with the human suffering this entails. Industrialized countries, responsibility for the lion's share of historical emissions, have a special responsibility under the Paris Agreement to provide climate finance. They possess the wealth, the prosperity, the economic power, and the technology to address the crisis. However, other high-emitting countries should also feel encouraged to contribute their fair share in line with the polluter pays principle. The new climate finance goal for the period after 2025, the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG. We already laughed a little bit about that abbreviation, and you will, without no doubt, hear it very often this evening, must be fair, needs-based, and focused on global climate justice. It must address the financing needs of the global south, and this not only involves mobilizing the trillions of dollars, billions, Billionen in Deutsch, needed for a just transition, but also ensuring that direct financial support flows from industrialized countries to development countries. The new climate finance goal must address the requirements of those who are suffering the most from the consequences of climate change. The current pledge of 100 billion, again in German, 100 Milliarden US dollars per year, falls far short of meeting growing needs. We need a much more ambitious goal grounded in a thorough needs assessment, and one that primarily distributes funding through grants, not through loans. The poorest countries should not have to incur debt to deal with the consequences of climate crisis. The QG must not only address the challenge posed by climate protection, but also prioritize the essential needs for adaptation and coping with climate-related loss and damages. 9 years have passed since the Paris Agreement, 9 years in which climate change has advanced recently. The cost of loss and damage is not longer theoretical. It has already reached billions of dollars. These costs are a burden for the very people who are least responsible for the crisis, and this threatens the survival of entire communities. This is why reliable funding must also be secure for the new fund for loss and damages. We can no longer hide behind the fact that funding wasn't ensured in the Paris Agreement. While more direct aid will be needed in the future, climate finance is about more than just providing money. Long after the negotiations in Baku over a climate finance goal have taken place, we must engage in wider conversations about debt relief, about access to affordable capital, about innovative financing mechanisms, about tax justice, and about wealth retributions. We need more political will and ambition to tap into new sources of funding, including those such as the introduction of a global tax on billionaires, which would increase the financial leeway available to industrial countries. Germany and the European Union have a central role to play in the negotiations in Baku over the climate finance goal. They must set a high bar and lead by example, encouraging other donor countries to follow suit. The strategy has been proven successful in the past, such as with the initial contribution to the Green Climate Fund or to the new fund for loss and damage. The international community is watching and expects us to keep our promise and assume leadership in a time of multiple crises. If not us, then who? Especially when the stakes are so high and right-wing populists continue to benefit from the current situation. Dear colleagues and friends, we are living through challenging times, but we must not allow ourselves to be discouraged. Now is the time to come together as a global community, restore justice, demonstrate solidarity, and secure a very real future for us all. It is unfortunate that the latest draft on the German federal budget foresees cuts to development funding, and these are serious cuts, and they are more serious even in the humanitarian funding. It's unprecedented and it's shameful. Future-proof policies are not made by abandoning the world's poorest people. On the contrary, this is the moment to increase support for the most vulnerable communities. Reducing funding for development cooperation and by extension climate finance sends the wrong message. It erodes the trust of our partners from the global south and weakens Germany and the EU standing as advocates for just climate policy. I'm very, very pleased and very glad to welcome both of you, our partners from Nepal and from Uganda, and I'm looking very much forward to hear your contributions. Your experiences, challenges and aspiration should inspire us to work harder towards our common aims. Your presence is a strong reminder that we must stand together in this crisis and seek joint solutions. And I am glad to see representatives of the German government in attendance, indicating a willingness to address the pressing issues. Let's unite in our efforts to deliver a strong, ambitious and forward-looking response to the climate crisis. I wish everyone here engaging and productive discussions. I hope the debate will inspire us all to take the necessary step to protect people in the global south and safeguard the future to safeguard our future, to safeguard the futures for generations to come. Thank you.
Testing. Ms. Prain, thank you so much for that. You've set the tone for our conversation that we're going to continue up front here on the podium. Thank you so much for doing the heavy lifting in that sense. We get a sense from your remarks how urgent the moment is, how big our needs are, but at the same time, the challenges we're facing in terms of mobilizing these much needed resources. Dr. Averbeck, it was interesting to see you hold up those trillions of dollars. Being a Zimbabwean myself, you conjured up memories of a time that it appears distant now, but we're still feeling the impacts of that. And Zimbabwe is certainly one of those countries as well where we're feeling the impacts of climate change. We're an agricultural producing country, and that's changing in so many ways because of the weather impacts we're feeling. I want to introduce our panelists to you up now because they have the job of breaking things down for us in a way that we can understand and take forward. If I could invite them all forward now, please. Mr. Raju Pandit Chetri from Nepal, if you wouldn't mind taking your seat over there. Maybe hold your applause until they've all arrived here, just to make sure they're all here. We'll have Hamira Kubusinya. She is, I'll introduce her. She is coming to us from Uganda. And you can take your seat next to Raju there. Hamira, thank you. Mr. Norbert Gorison, if you could please take your seat in the center there. Yeah, he's the man in the middle because he's going to be getting it from all directions this evening. So that is by design. And then I want to invite Jan Kolvozik to join me over here. So just some introduction. I'll start with Raju. He's got 15 years of experience in climate change and development. He hails from Nepal. He's a member of the climate finance team of the least developed countries group that's under the UN FCCC process. He leads an environment and a development organization called Prakriti Resources Center, or PRC to be simple. And he's also a member of the Climate Finance Technical Committee in the Nepalese Ministry of Finance. Next to him is Hamira Kubusinya. She's a climate activist from Uganda. She has founded the Climate Justice for Africa, which campaigns for climate protection as well as women's rights. She was recently a recipient of the Bremen Solidarity Award for her commitment and her work. She also campaigns on loss and damage financing. Next to her is Mr. Norbert Gorison. He is the Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Action. This is in the German Federal Foreign Office. He has years of experience working on German climate diplomacy, as well as a particular expertise in international climate finance. He was on the EU, he was the EU's lead negotiator for the climate finance in the Paris Agreement. And right next to me is Jan Kolvozik. He is the Senior Policy Advisor for Climate Change at Oxfam, Germany. He's been following the UN climate negotiations for over a decade now, Jan. And that includes the negotiations around the Paris Agreement as well as its implementation. And every year, Jan publishes a state of play briefing on Germany's climate finance. Let's get straight into the conversation, and perhaps I'll kick it off with you, Mr. Gorison, because here we are facing a time where we know that the 100 billion, as we heard in Ms. Dagmar Prain's remarks, is not enough in terms of what has already been committed. And we look at the submission that has been made for the new climate finance target from the European Union. That is also arguably not enough, or perhaps let me remove the word arguably. Sorry about that. So what I would like for you to perhaps start by telling us is, of course, what is the responsibility that a country like Germany has in particular to do that. But I think maybe I'll give you a moment to just give that a thought, because Raju and Hamira, why don't we just kick off with you maybe telling us about how climate change is impacting your countries, where you come from, in Nepal, and of course with you in Uganda.
Thank you very much, Christine, and namaste to everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you very much for the Climate-Allianz and also the Debate for the World for inviting me to be in the panel today. Well, if you talk about the impacts of climate change in Nepal, well, Nepal is a small Himalayan country, I guess most of you know. But if you look at the impacts recently, what has really been the case, like any other countries, the impacts are really growing in the country, in the sense that because given our geography of being a Himalayan country, but then also having a very difficult geographical terrain of hills and plains, the kind of impacts that we face are very diverse. In the mountains, we face glacier melting at a very high rate. In the hills, we have problems with massive landslides and flooding. Similarly, in the plains, we have droughts and other things. But at the same time, while we talk about droughts and floods, we also see a lot of now forest fires. This has been a very difficult time for Nepal to really engage in its development activities. Just this year, because of the bad monsoon that we had, nearly 215 people lost their lives, and around 50 people are missing. Nearly 300 people got injured just from this monsoon. But it doesn't make headlines. That's the unfortunate part in the international media, right? This year, we also saw 2 glacier lakes outburst floods. 2 of the lakes in the Himalayas got outbursts, and it's wiped out the entire village in the mountain region. This is supposed to be in the Everest region, where it's a very touristic region, and that's the kind of impacts we're facing. Now, with that impact, what is happening? The government that is supposed to be addressing poverty, putting in the infrastructure, health, education, it is having to cut down its budget so that it can address these climate-induced disasters that's increasing over the years. I think this is the kind of scenario that we face currently, and this is becoming a very big challenge.
So that's the view from Nepal. And in Uganda, if you could please just give us a sense of how you're experiencing the impact of climate change, Hamira.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about Uganda, but I'm inclined to not only talk about Uganda as a representative for Africa in general. These issues that Raju is talking about actually really evident in our continent. I'll start with the cyclones in Mozambique and then go on to the whole washed out shores of Senegal, and then where lives are being impacted, and not forgetting the whole of East Africa, where we're dealing with droughts, and the droughts have claimed human lives, wildlife, there's food scarcity right now. People cannot afford something as cheap as a necessity as food. Let's not forget talking about the Sahel region, where they're facing both floods and drought at the same time. And there's food insecurity, there's all these crises happening. Then you come home to my country. Last year alone, we lost 900 people due to hunger and the dry season in the Karamoja region. Not forgetting the landslides that happened. 2 weeks back, we had a landfill falling due to the changing climate. And this is disasters we deal with every day. And I know I'm going so ahead, but every time we have a disaster in my country, I have to go to either IMF or World Bank to borrow money to deal with these disasters. And while we are actually talking about climate finance, we should also probably mention that it should be in grants and not in loans, because our country is already draining in loans right now. And I want to say so much, but I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that perspective there, for clearly making the case, funds are being diverted. We're talking about countries that desperately need development, but funds are having to be diverted to managing crises brought on by climate change. And the indebtedness, I think we're talking about a region now where most countries, about 60% of countries in sub-Saharan Africa are either in debt distress or near debt distress. So debt levels are already unsustainable. So we come to you now, Mr. Gorison, and we say, what is the responsibility of Germany, for one, and the greater European Union at a time like this, when we're looking at mobilizing new finance commitments?
Thank you first for the invitation and also for the insights from both from Nepal and Uganda. I would like to frame it as a start from a little bit a different perspective. When we talk about climate finance, international climate finance, we have to talk about what do we do, what do we need to do, what do we do to mobilize in order to transform our economies globally towards decarbonization, emission reduction, energy transition. That's number one. Second, what do we need to do in order to adapt communities and countries to the impacts of climate change? That's what we heard from you, and increase resilience. And then, of course, the third thing is what is called loss and damage. How do we be able to address also the damages which have already occurred? And it's true, the funding which is available globally is not sufficient. So that's why we think, and that's what we also said, you mentioned the submission of the European Union, that a new climate finance target or goal needs to be more comprehensive than what we have been discussing so far with 100 billion. It needs to address and respect the needs from developing countries for support in all those three areas. And that's why our vision for the NCQG, or the new collective quantified goal, is to have a multi-layered approach. So it should address the investments which need to be mobilized in order to transform societies, and also invest in adaptation and finance, and at the same time it needs to continue to have a core of public finance which builds more or less on the previous 100 billion goal. And fit for purpose also means that the new quantified collective goal needs to address not only the quantum of the funding. Everybody's looking now at numbers, but it also needs to look how is the money used in a most effective way. How is it accessed? How could it more easily be accessed? How transparent is it? What does it have for impact? And where does it come from? Which is also an important part. And what is obvious, of course, you can always say industrialized countries, as Dagmar Punes said, have a responsibility to do more, that there is a need to mobilize more public funds from budgets. But it is very obvious if you look at the numbers which are around for the needs, they are not in the billions, they're in the trillions, Billionen in German. So thousands of billions. We have numbers between 1 and 5 trillions which are around. And actually it doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 5, because this number is huge in any case. And it's very obvious that those numbers cannot be mobilized from public budgets. So therefore we need to look also at other ways to mobilize these funds. In addition to public funds, I'm not refraining from that, and then we come to a whole range of areas. From first of all, I would say it's important to mobilize more private finance in this respect. So today, for instance, about 80 to 90% of investments in renewable energies globally take only place in OECD countries and China. So meaning that only 10 to 20% is happening in the majority of countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. That has to be changed. And we need to look at what is the reason why these flows are not going there. Secondly, the system of multilateral development bank and international financial institutions can and should do more. We're working on that, but there's still room for more. Thirdly, there is a need to look at innovative sources, at international innovative sources, which can contribute to it. Fourthly, we of course also have to look at indebtedness and address that, because it's obvious that increasing indebtedness is a hindrance again addressing climate action. And of course, finally, there will be a core role for public finance. And for Germany and for the European Union, and that's what we very clearly say in our submission, it's clear that we take on this responsibility to respect the leadership of industrialized countries or developed countries to mobilize climate finance. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the way how we have divided between those who have to contribute and those who have not to contribute is completely outdated. In 1992, the annexes of the UNFCCC of the Climate Convention have been defined, and at that time it has been defined who is a country which has to contribute and who has not to contribute. And that is something which simply is no longer acceptable, and therefore we are also talking about from which countries the climate finance should be provided. We think that countries who are able to provide climate finance based on both their income, their GDP per capita, and their emissions should also contribute to climate finance. So that's in essence what we are saying in our submission. What we did not say, and that's part of a question mark, of course, is what are the numbers? So we have so far only XXX in this submission and not numbers. That is a very sensitive question, and I'm sure that will be resolved only in Baku in the last minutes. And I can tell you, there's no number we have in mind right now, except that we, of course, accept that the core of the financing needs to be on the basis of the 100 billion. So it needs beyond the 100 billion which we have provided so far. So I may stop here, and it was quite long. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And Jana, I want to get some reaction to you now, but I think this 100 billion needs to be put in context. And I recently heard that a G7 country, which I will not name, spent $100 billion. I don't want to say the currency. It wasn't the US, but they spent 100 billion on fuel subsidy just in the last 2 years. So that just gives you a sense of what 100 billion is in the context of what we need to do. A single G7 country spends that in fuel subsidies in the last 2 years. So Jan, we've heard it there from Mr. Gorison. A lot was said there, including other polluters need to join the club. We need to rope in the private sector because public budgets aren't going to do that. Just your perspective from Oxfam.
Yeah. So you said, was it you saying Norbert would get it from all sides today? So maybe I should start saying there's a lot of things that Norbert, that you said that I would agree with. Say, yeah, these things need to be part of the NCQG. So the core for public finance, for instance, is one thing. The very idea we need to shift the investments, global investments, all financial flows to meet or to implement the Paris Agreement is something I can totally agree with. The question is, what can the NCQG do here? I mean, is this possible to put it there, or does it need to be done somewhere else? But the principal idea, we would all say, yeah, of course, this is needed. We can't reach or keep warming below 1.5 and allow everyone to adapt and so forth. If you don't shift all the flows that work against that, that's totally the case. And if the NCQG can contribute to that, then even better. And also the idea of, we also need to look that the money is put to good use, that it's efficient and effective. We improve access to climate finance. All that are things that the NCQG can help with. So I totally agree with that. This still leaves us with a problem that even if we shift private investments and all that, we will need public money. And the public, I mean, let the private sector do what they can do, but they still will leave a gap of public finance that is needed. And this public finance is not just 100 billion or a little more than 100 billion. This is going to be $1 trillion or even more. no less than $1 trillion. So it needs to be 10 times as much. And depending how you account for climate finance, when you look at the estimates, you actually need $1 trillion in grants or grant equivalents for climate finance. So this means when you give out a loan, that's not what you need. You need to have the loan cheap enough for a country to afford it. Therefore, you need to look at how concessional it is, what the interest rate is for. So the technical term grant equivalence comes to play. And I'm saying this only because this means we're not talking about a factor of 10, but maybe of a factor of 20 or 30 in terms of what we need compared to what we have now in annual public climate finance. That is the needs, and we can argue about estimates in the available literature, what the needs are, but that's the order of magnitude we're talking about. So we're not talking about improving on the 100 billion a little, we're talking about a dramatic step change that we need to do if we want to answer to the needs of developing countries. And ideally, from our perspective, the NCQG must do that. And now we have the problem, how do you get from 100 billion from developed countries to 10 times, at least 10 times as much? And then I hear Norbert saying, I hear this everywhere, that developed countries say, that's not possible from our budget. You said it now, and I understand that. I follow this issue long enough to understand that this is, of course, not possible. But the NCQG needs to do the trick to recognize these are the needs. This is what we collectively agree on. We want to provide and mobilize for developing countries. And yes, we have to work out the ways how this can be done, also given the realities in developed countries, because just having a goal and already knowing it's not going to be implemented because developed countries won't be able to cough up that money doesn't help. So we need to work on this collectively. So that's a big challenge. And one other thing, if I may, I don't want to speak too long, is the EU and other developed countries so far reject the idea that the new goal will also cover the needs to provide public finance to address loss and damage in the NCQG. And this is a big gap that developed countries are facing with. In my view, if they don't accept the necessity of loss and damage also as part of the NCQG, there might be no deal, or at least lots of vulnerable countries will be extremely unhappy with any outcome of the NCQG in Baku.
Jan, you've just given me a point to get to, Hamira, because you campaigned specifically on the point of loss and damage. And when you're hearing that that might not necessarily be part of the submission that is made by EU countries, just what is your response to that?
My response is that's still unfair, and that's still advocating in line with climate injustice, and that's still pushing us to stay in the state of quagmire, where we are already dealing with the already impactful brunt of the climate crisis. But you're now telling us that you actually have to stay where you are, and we are still going to expect you to actually adjust. The reason I am always advocating for loss and damage is because we have the climate finance, we have adaptation finance, but you cannot sell someone who has lost everything, who has lost their home, who has lost their way of living, who has lost their source of income, to now start adapting to something that has almost made them lose their lives, or even some of them have lost their children to these impacts. And you're telling us now we have to adapt to start thinking of adapting and start thinking of investing in new renewable energy. I think that is a very unthought out process for the global north, and a very insensitive point for them to make towards our communities and towards our countries.
Yeah. And Hamira is being diplomatic, but Hamira is making the point to say, she's holding back,
Yeah.
but she is making the point to say, you're going to people and you're saying, decarbonize, right? And I think we're having back and forths with people on the continent, but at the same time, you're saying to people, well, deal with your own problems in terms of the impacts you're feeling with this, but decarbonize. And that is the challenge that we're experiencing. Raju, you work in the realm of mobilizing finance, so to say. And we're hearing that public budgets in wealthy and industrialized countries are not going to cover or the climate financing that is needed. But when you think about the number that we need, we've got an XXX from Mr. Gorison, but what kind of numbers would you be sensing from the side of Nepal and other developing countries would be needed to come?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think we'll have to put things in perspective, in the right context, because what the science has been telling us was the impact that's being seen all around the world. It is telling us that we are in a very critical decade. If we do not act now with high ambition, it means that we're losing the target of meeting 1.5 degree world by the end of this century. I think and for that particular reason, climate finance is absolutely necessary. Now you see this from a perspective when Paris Agreement was really being designed or being negotiated. What was the thrust of it? That we would have a top goal, like global goal, 1.5 degree world that we see by the end of this century, and meeting carbon neutrality by mid-century, and then asking all the countries to come out with national plans, or what do we call it, a nationally determined contribution, to say that we meet that, and we revise every 5 years. And one of the things that really hinges on the effectiveness of that is the climate finance tool, right? So what is happening currently is that the future of the Paris Agreement would really hang if we do not have this agreement being taken forward in an ambitious manner in the upcoming COP. Now, this is very much directed to the lives and livelihood of the people on the ground. Now, you say that there is no money, or let's say there's the developed countries don't have sufficient money to mobilize. I don't want to judge whether it is right or wrong. There was almost $11 trillion mobilized during the time of COVID. Now, you can always say that when the money was needed, that came up. There's trillions of dollars being mobilized for wars-related other things, right? So why is climate change not a priority when it comes to taking action? Because if you look at all the plans that is put forward as in the form of NDCs, it is going to need almost about $5.6 to $5.8 trillion based on the need assessment report done by the Standing Committee on Finance, but that's by 2030. So if that particular context, you can divide that 1 trillion around per year, right? But if we even that implementing all those plans that the developing countries have put forward are conditional. One, they will do it by themselves, certain elements. There are certain elements that they would only be able to achieve if the financial resources were provided to them. So in that particular context, even all those plans would be implemented, it would still take us to almost 2.7 to 3 degree world by the end of this century. So what is science telling us, and what is the action that we are taking is not matching that. So in the current context, if we say that there is no resources to the kind of problem that we are facing, we said it's a very significant problem, then we are not addressing, or we're not being honest enough to address the problem to the magnitude that we have in front of us. That is the reality of the world. In order to do that, do we want the Paris Agreement to succeed or fail in Baku? I think that is a very fundamental question. Because if we do not have an ambitious NCQG or the climate finance goal in Baku, it means that we're not being serious to the agreement that we made 9 years back. And 9 years now, we are still struggling with that, right? So this is the confidence that will allow. Now, of course, you can always talk about whether you have the public finance source as at the core, or do you talk about all the investment? I do agree with Norbert that in order to address climate change and reach that goal of 1.5 degrees, just having public money provide from developed to developing countries is not going to be the only answer. In that particular case, we need to mobilize all the actors, yes. Private sector, in the developed countries and developing countries also making that effort. But in that particular context, like that of 100 billion, what is the core that is going to build that confidence on? Because climate, the climate finance will be a trust builder, will be a confidence builder, and really saying that we own the Paris Agreement. We will take Paris Agreement to by heart and we'll take that action. That is what is going to drive that. But until it's very unfortunate, we have had this discussion for the last 3 years, and we do not see that seriousness. Now, we don't have the number yet. But if it is not $1 trillion, then what is that core? You know, you talk about the $100 billion that was agreed in 2009. If you put that number in current context now, that with the inflation, it is going to be $149 billion US dollars. So we're even not we should not be even talking about the floor of $100 billion. We should be talking of the floor of $149 billion if you put it in present context. And with that, if it is, how do we look at, the core? Do we double that, triple that, quadruple that? Now, what is the amount that is put as a core? So that it builds confidence for the governments to make more ambitious action, one, to put in plans. Second, it gives confidence to the private sector, to the MDBs, to all the other actors to say that let's work towards that direction. That let's put Paris Agreement, the objective, in the core of implementing that. So if we don't have that, that is the essence that I see. And again, to be very frank and honest, that if we do not have this goal delivered in Baku, then we're compromising the lives and livelihood of millions of people on the ground. And we are the ones who are suffering the most. That because of our capability, because of our ability to respond to these impacts. Already people are losing lives. That's the reality. Yeah. But do we take that into account or not while we actually, in fact, go to Baku?
Raju, thank you. You're talking about a confidence builder there. And Mr. Gorison, again, I want to press you on the point about Germany's role on this, because we're talking about a country that has significant political capital. I know if you speak to countries in the global south, Germany is viewed as having the political capital to be able to influence these conversations. You know Germany's reach as a development, a cooperation partner in many of our countries. We see KfW and GIZ tents, so we know the presence of Germany. We appreciate Germany as a partner. It's this same Germany that we look to influence other developed countries. Do you see that as well as part of Germany's role, mobilizing the international community? You have the credibility, you've done the work, and now we're at a time where Europe is fighting to win back hearts and minds in the global south. Isn't this that moment that Germany has to show that leadership that, quite frankly, your partners around the world are expecting?
Thank you for the question, and a very quick answer. Yes, of course, we are willing to play a key role, and we do that already. But before I come to that, let me react to some of the points I heard. The new climate finance goal, the NCQG, needs to be really ambitious and fit for purpose. But at the same time, it also needs to be realistic. And I think we need to look at also the political situation we are in, not only in Germany. So look around to the classical developed countries, industrialized countries. Where's the country where the situation, the political situation in the country, in the parliament, in the government, in the public, is that we could increase public climate finance 10 times, as you have requested for, Jan. I don't see any country, including Germany. This is simply not realistic. It may be wishful thinking, and it may be nice to have that, but I can't see this coming. Even if I want it, I myself, I can't convince our finance minister, our parliament, not the public. You know what a difficult debate we had here in Germany about international finance, about ODA this year, to really go in this direction. So therefore, this is simply not realistic. We need a number which is realistic. And 1 trillion public finance from developed country is not realistic. First of all, and that would help a lot, is that we need to look at the realities of global realities today. And the global realities that there are more rich countries than only those who are classically contributing to climate finance. And I hate really, to some extent, this division between developed and developing countries in this very simple way. If you talk about the NDCs, which need to be implemented in order to reach 1.5 degrees, or at least lower than 2.7, and you say they're hinging on climate finance, then it's of course true for many countries. But 80% of the emissions are not coming from developing countries, as you have in mind. They're coming from the G20. When I talk about the G20, I think it's a different story. It's really a different story. We cannot provide the huge amounts of grant finance to the emerging economies within the G20, which are heavily emitting. We have to have a different approach here, and that needs to be respected. My next point is to you. You said not to include loss and damage finance in climate finance is unfair. That's not the point. We are not saying that there doesn't need to be loss and damage finance. We only don't think it's useful to have the loss and damage finance included in the NCQG. That does not mean that there wouldn't be any loss and damage finance. So that's simply two completely different things. This debate will continue. There's more ways to address loss and damage finance than only through the new fund. There's other funding arrangements. There's opportunities to link it also to other ways, and we will look at that. And for sure, when it comes to loss and damage finance, it's not something where only the traditional industrialized countries are responsible for. So therefore, I agree to the confidence and to the trust point. The core of the NCQG needs to create this trust and this confidence. Absolutely true. I said already, we also agree and we will work towards providing the leadership of developed countries to come forward from a floor of 100 billion. What the exact number will be, I can't say today. That is a very sensitive political debate. We are working with our fellow contributing countries also to do more and to do what they can. But what we need really is also the understanding that it's not only us, the OECD, the classical industrialized countries who have to contribute. Name it. I think there is a role for the rich fossil fuel producing countries in the Gulf region also to provide climate finance. There is a role for China also to contribute to climate finance. There is a role for countries like Singapore and Korea to provide for climate finance, just to name a few. So if that is not addressed, and we are shying away from that and only arguing like developed and developing countries, and we mean developing countries in the definition of 1992, we will not making progress. It's not coming back to the political situation. I already said it. It's unrealistic to increase public climate finance tenfold. It's even more unrealistic to increase it at all if other donors are not coming in, if other contributors are not coming in. I can't explain anybody on the street, in the public, in the media, in the parliament, in the government, why those countries which I have already named are excluded from contributing to climate finance. Simply impossible. Nobody understands that. And we all have been, or most of you from the climate bubble have been last year in the UAE. Look at where we were. Yeah. So then you can see, is that a developing country which cannot contribute to climate finance?
Jan, we have to be more realistic, and others need to be roped into this effort. It can't just be about the developed countries, the traditional ones. Yeah.
Now, about being realistic. So I don't want to give in on realism, in quotation marks, and say, sorry, communities all over the world, the money is just not there. You'll have to find your own ways of adapting, of transforming, of all that. Simply because the money isn't there, that's realism. I don't accept that as an NGO, as you can, of course, imagine. I know, I understand, even if the government was a very left progressive government in Germany, they couldn't increase 10 times climate finance. Of course, I know this is not, it doesn't work like that, but that's what I meant when I said we need a step change in thinking. We can't just continue a little bit better than before. That doesn't work. This will be giving up on the Paris Agreement simply because we are not ready to organize the monies that are there. It's not that there is not the money. There's so much wealth, there's so many richness in the world, so much money. It's just the problem is, where is it? And you could even in Germany, you could get trillions of euros just by taxing the rich and super rich. And if you do that globally, you get so much money. The money is there, and that would then be public money you can use. So the problem is not the money isn't there. The problem is politicians, governments are not ready to take the money where it is. And if you would tax the super rich, they wouldn't even notice. They are so rich that they don't notice when you take a little bit away, but this little bit is billions and billions and trillions that you have. So that's a problem. The money is there, the wealth is there, the economic strength is there to do all that. And we are not even then talking about expanding the contributor base, because you would have enough money that way from the traditional donors. The other thing is, and that's what I said, the NCQG couldn't possibly, I'm realistic enough to commit developed countries to increase climate finance 10 times. I understand that. But I want the NCQG to recognize these are the needs, and let's work together on how we get to those needs, including on public finance, and then find solutions that can include another step, bullet point C, and to get to the trillion, developed countries will do X, Y, and Z. We can talk about these kind of a process that after that, how to get to that amount. And on the contributor base, I'm totally with you. The world has changed. I also think, or Oxfam thinks, countries with comparable responsibility and comparable capacity could also be expected to contribute comparably. Obviously, this has to be done in ways that are consistent with the Paris Agreement, so we don't want to open that up. But in principle, I'm with you. My fear is that will give us not a step change. If that gives us another 50 billion, then we are at 150 billion, so we're only compensating for inflation. We are not getting any more money out of that, even though I understand the point why you would want them in it. I have the feeling that in itself is not going to help us to master the challenge.
So Jan, you've opened the conversation a little bit about where the money should come from, taxing the wealthy in all of our countries. But I do want to come back to you, Raju and Hamira, because there is also the issue about the private sector money flowing into all of this. Could you give us a sense of how what the experience is engaging the private sector to try and invite this investment into countries like Nepal and Uganda? What does that take, and what has been the experience?
Yes, well, knowing my own country's context and the kind of the group of countries with LDCs that I particularly work with, the population of 45 LDC countries is about 1.2 billion people, and the total emission is about 3-point-something%. But now, because we do not have emission, so this group of countries, which are highly vulnerable, poor, low-capacitated countries, be punished for not having that, that negative emission. Why I say this is because if you talk about the investment and private sectors, no private sector is going to these countries to invest and make money, because when do the private sector come in? They come to making money. If they see return, that they come, right? So there's no context that the private sectors would come and invest in our countries and they will help adapt to the impacts of climate change or, build the economy or protect. But that is not, we don't trust on that part, because we have clearly seen that in the last number of years, when all these Paris Agreement is in the place of implementation, we have prepared our national adaptation plan, we have prepared the low carbon development plans or the NDC plans. How many of them have really come and said, okay, you have really built on this, we'll come and support you? None. And if you, not just that, look at the MDBs who are supposed to be helping our plans to really, they completely ignore those plans and say, okay, these are our priorities because we have to invest on these areas. There's nothing to do with NDCs that the countries have really prioritized. So if you think that the private sectors are going to come to these poor, vulnerable countries, then that is not happening, because for them, there's no profit thing, there's no enabling environment, they have no trust that the infrastructure that is there in the countries are really going to provide that space for them to come in. The scale is very small for them to come in. What happens, and that is where the injustice will prevail. It means that if you look from an investment perspective, they are only going to those high-emitting countries where there are more enabling environments for them, more policy space in place. And for them, it means that the poor, vulnerable, low-capacitated countries are going to be left out. And that is where the problem comes, because for a group of our countries like ours, adaptation is the number one priority. It relates to our climate resilient development, achieving sustainable development, addressing poverty, food security, and energy poverty. These are very much interlinked. Yeah. There's hardly any emission to come and invest and say that we will do into that part. And no private sector is going to come and make money in managing glacier lakes, outburst floods, or managing other disasters or things like that. So we'll have to see and really put these things in perspective. That's why, earlier we talked about the loss and damage. That is one of the very fundamental reasons why we say the scope of NCQZ must clearly, fulfill all three pillars: mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And now, because of the low action on mitigation, we're having to see more need for adaptation and loss and damage. That is the current scenario we are in. But if the NCQZ is all about investment, is going to the emission is about looking at the mitigation side, then we feel that our countries are going to be punished. So we are being punished because we do not have the emission. That would be very unfortunate, very high in terms of fairness and justice. That would not be the right path to go forward.
Amira.
Thank you very much. Before I answer your question, I would want to start from the beginning. He had talked about why it's impossible for the government of Germany to increase in how much they spend on climate finance and loss and damage. And he talked about the political situation. He talked about how he cannot explain to the general population why they are spending this much on climate finance and contributing. And if you ask me, as someone who is very, very passionate about informing people and informing communities, the reason why Global North leaders are finding it very hard to explain to their population is because they're not educating their population about the historical contribution to the climate crisis that is existing right now. My continent contributes less than 5% of global CO2 greenhouse gases. And Germany and Europe and US alone contribute the majority of this pollution. And if only leaders could actually educate their population, they could educate the members of the parliament that we're giving this money, we are contributing this money because we did A, B, C, E, and D in the 1800s when industrialization was happening, and this is the repercussion of today, that the climate crisis is not something that you pollute in Germany and you see the repercussions in Germany, but we polluted and we destroyed the ozone layer, and right now the Horn of Africa is right now experiencing a drought, a prolonged drought. We did this, and right now there's floods in Senegal. We did this, and right now the Sahel region is an inhabitable region. And if populations understand the reason why this money is being spent, trust me, they would actually want to spend this money. They would even actually want to contribute to why we are spending this money. But right now, we have kept all the information about the climate crisis. We have kept the contribution of these developed countries to the climate crisis, and we're just saying the Global South needs money, or we need to give money to the UNFCCC for climate finance, which is actually not the actual truth. The truth is, let's educate the communities. Let's tell them A, B, C, and D happened, and we have to contribute A, B, C, this amount of money to see that we combat the climate crisis, to see that resilience is built in these communities and in Uganda and in Africa, and even in Nepal, where he comes from. And I have talked about also, let's talk about where the money is coming from. It also goes back to when you say private sectors coming to our countries. I come from a country where we right now are having oil. And now we are seeing private sectors coming because they are taking and they are polluting, and they are ready to put their claws anywhere that they can destroy and make money out of, and human rights are being destroyed, people are being displaced. All these big impacts are happening to our country. And we have fought against the eco pipeline. We are still fighting, but because it makes them quick money, they will come. Right now, investing in solar energy in my country is very expensive, but yet solar energy, wind energy, hydrogen, these are sources of energy that are renewable, that can replenish themselves eventually. But because investors don't feel like this is easy money for them, they feel like they have to jump so many hoops. And this is the repercussions we're having. But again, where the money comes from, educate your population, educate your communities, educate your private sector, educate your politicians. Trust me, they will want to give that money when they know the reasons why they're giving that money. You're putting this picture that the Global North is innocent and we're trying to steal money away from them and we're trying to put claws in them. That's not the truth. The truth is, you historically you invested in industrialization, and you burnt the ozone layer, and right now we're seeing the repercussions. And then you mentioned bringing in the G20 and having other donors on the table. But also, the truth is, the global north or the other countries like Germany, Europe, France, USA have not made a very good example. We see you as big brothers in this thing, and you have set a very poor example. Even when China comes on board, even when the EU comes on, UAE comes on board, they will take the footsteps you have taken, because you've made so many promises and you've not acted towards the promises. You've promised heaven on earth and then you've just given us mud. And I feel like, yes, they will come on board, but the leadership you have given as the pioneers of the table that is supposed to actually bring donations, and the pioneers that contributed to the climate crisis, you are not leading right as the big brothers in the industry. Thank you very much.
So Mr. Gorison, I'll allow you to respond to that. The messages you've not led by example.
Yeah, many messages I can respond to. Before I really respond, I would just make one specific remark to you, Amira. You said you're all in your country, and the private sector is coming now and is suppressing your country and dismissing human rights, etc. There is somebody who lets the private sector coming in your country. You need to think about that. If you would control that, there's a government of Uganda which can set the directions for that. But that's a separate discussion. Let's not go in the details of that. Just to acknowledge what you said, it is right what you said. We need to educate our society, our public, about our responsibility, about the need, why we have to take up the responsibility and have to provide assistance to developing countries, not only for climate, also for biodiversity, for many things. So that's absolutely true. I agree to that. I believe that. But that's not only a job for me or for the Foreign Office or for the government. It's a job for the whole society. And I here speak also to organizations like Oxfam and Bread for the World. They know how the situation is in this country. We all have to work on that. And unfortunately, the situation is not like that has become more and more clear for the people. Just the opposite. That's where we are. And I really regret that. I'm not advocating for that. It's really depressing me, also me, that we are in such a situation at that moment. But it's the reality, unfortunately. I have to say that. And to both of you, you're absolutely right. The LDCs and the African countries are not the countries who are contributing a lot to emissions. They're not the countries who are responsible. They are the countries who are suffering most. We fully acknowledge that. And we also say in our speeches again and again that in particular public finance, in particular grant finance, needs to go for adaptation and in the most vulnerable countries. We not only say that, we also execute that. That's really our priority, what we do with private finance. On the other hand, I would say even you can still do something in order to make it easier for the private sector to invest in cleaner technologies. There's a role for every country and for every government. It's of course more difficult for the very poor and the very small countries, but for the bigger the country gets, the more easy it is. I'm sure it is possible to invest and make profits from renewables in a country like Nepal. And I know that Nepal is also still using a lot of fossil fuel for electricity production. So there's also something you can do. But having said that, I fully acknowledge your point. We have to provide adaptation finance, grant-based from public funds, and we're doing that. I can also say, and Jan can confirm that the European Union is providing, the European Union and Germany is the biggest chunk of that, 60% of the 100 billion, almost. That's we are contributing to that. There's other developed countries who are falling apart. And so I don't want to take up all the responsibilities for all of developed countries, as I don't ask you to take up all the responsibilities for developing countries. It's a little bit too simple to only talk in these two classes. And Jan, you said we need a step change, not just a marginal improvement of the 100 billion. I fully agree. I can say I fully agree to that. And I said it already. What our idea of the NCQG is not just the continuation of the 100 billion, a little bit more. No, we think we need NCQG which is fit for purpose, which addresses the need of developing countries, and that is why we're talking about a two-layered or multi-layered approach for the NCQG. And the step change in thinking has to be about identifying other ways to mobilize the finance. And in my initial remarks, I already mentioned that with the MDBs, with the private sector, with philanthropies, with new sources coming from maybe also a new international tax, from charging international transport, from charging profits from fossil fuel producing companies, with addressing debt in a fairer way. I agree to all of that. That is exactly where the step change, in our view, needs to come from, and where we have to work together to reach that. And it's not a secret if I say that it's not easy for us as a Foreign Office to really make that step change happening, even in a government like Germany, and it's of course not easy in all the other ways. So we need all forces united to get there. And maybe my final remark is on the billionaires tax or the wealth tax. It had been discussed in the G20 this year. Brazil has put forward a proposal from a French economist, Guzman. It has been discussed in July. I think the media have reported back, and some of the finance ministers in a way, as if it had been completely rejected. But if you read carefully the language about that in the communique of the finance minister, it's not true. There's still an opening of working on it. And I think that's what we love in negotiations, that you have ambiguous language which allows to be interpreted in both directions. So I would say, and I really advise all NGOs, all actors to look in the language and ask for continued work on that. It's not over. It wasn't over for taxing multilateral companies, and it will not be over also to taxing wealthy individuals. So that should continue. It's a long way. You can only go step by step. You will not have something like that being decided from one day to the other. But don't give up. That's my say. All those points are still on the table, and that's the step change in thinking, which I fully endorse.
And I hope you're listening, Dr. Averbek, because those trillions you made in Zimbabwe will be taxed. She showed us her trillions of dollars from Zimbabwe, so that is still on the table. So Jan, it's still on the table, the wealth taxes, etc. But I want to get just your final maybe responses to this, and then we'll open to the floor for questions for Q&A. So have your questions ready, Jan.
I think, as I said earlier, I don't disagree with much what's in the European Union's submission on all the stuff. And I totally agree when I say step change, I of course mean not only what I say about public finance, but I also mean about getting the private sector involved in terms of directing financial flows elsewhere. And if the NCQG can help doing that, then yes, let's absolutely do that, including agreeing a list of things that we can collectively or individually as countries do to make that happen, rather than just mentioning a goal. I'm just worried that even if we did that, there is a big chunk of external support in public money that needs to go to developing countries. Not to all of them. There's some countries currently in the group of developing countries that don't need external support, and some of them even say they don't need it. But anyway, you know which countries I mean, I guess. And that's where I'm still afraid we're not doing this step change, and then maybe the mobilizing privates or shifting financial flows will not work out as we wanted, because we're not doing enough from the public hand, so to speak, with public finance. That's my big worry I still have, that we need to work on. And I don't want to be unrealistic, but I also know it is a matter of climate justice that the needs of developing countries, and that includes public finance, is going to be met. Otherwise, the NCQG will not necessarily be a success, if at least not recognize it. And maybe, as you said, maybe by ways of an opening where we can continue, because we can't say developed countries should increase climate finance 10 times, but we can recognize what the needs are. We can anchor in what developed countries are ready to commit to at COP29, and then have a process. Okay, where's the rest of the money going to come from? Let's have a small opening where we can continue the conversation.
Raju?
Yes. Well, I mean, what I would really suggest is to stick to something that we have all agreed to, and that is the basis is the Paris Agreement. If we try and have the debate about what angle do we bring in, do we create new innovativeness and all these issues, then we may be going to a very different direction, leaving out the implementation of the Paris Agreement. I think that is a very key document, and of course, also it builds on the convention. There is a part, there is a article. I mean, if you look at the Paris Agreements, Article 2.2, it talks about the CBDR, common differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. I think that's very clearly laid out there. So if developed countries would take the responsibility as a first step, as a part of the historical responsibility, to say that this is what our numbers are, or this is what we would really like to contribute, and then build on that there is a space for others to really say how much is going to be mobilized from private sector, what comes, how do we give a signal to MDBs and others. Because UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement under this convention, others are not a party. The governments who are a party to this Paris Agreement and convention, right? So in that particular sense, we have to give a very clear message that we take this seriously. Because if you look into the other actors that are beyond our control, who do not even report to, then it's a very fundamental problem there. I think that's one thing. The second part is that as we go to Baku, if we ask, we are in Germany, German context, how does Germany want to portray itself as a responsible country? Of course, there are two sides of it. One, Germany as an individual country. And of course, now I know that Germany does not individually negotiate. It's a part of the European bloc, but Germany is a major player in the European Union. So as a bloc, how does it play a role so it can really advance this, the NCQG forward? Why I say this is, in the past, since I've been following this some time, European Union has always been a kind of a player, or let's say a group of, party that sometimes comes with innovativeness to, have amicable ideas and then to come to a conclusion. But last 3 years, that has been a little lacking. So how do we see that again coming back? So in case, let's say NCQG fails in Azerbaijan, of course we don't want that scenario, of course. But how does a German government really tells its own people that have we succeeded or have we really contributed to the vision of the Paris Agreement or not? I think that is a very fundamental part that we'll also have to see from our own perspective, as an individual country, but as a responsible member of the very responsible bloc European Union. I think that is a very key part. And in that particular context, public finance will be the basis of how we build our vision in the NCQG going forward. As I said earlier, that if we do not know what that public finance, because for a group of like LDCs like mine, or a country like mine, or for small island developing states, or for Africa, it is not about that the private sector is one day going to come and help us. It is the public finance that is what is expected to really help build our ambition embedded into that part. Without that, what we see the tendency of failure of the Paris Agreement. Now, if we say that, okay, now there are players who should come, other players should come in, only then we can take more. Others players could come in. But what is the historical responsible countries are really putting on the table? That is a very key part. In the UAE last year, when the loss and damage fund was operationalized, what the UAE said, we'll put in first $100 million on the table and bring in all the others. I mean, we didn't say no to that. Of course, we work that wholeheartedly. If other countries would want to voluntarily come and really say that we would like to be a part of that, that's great. And we know that in order to reach 1.5 degree, I will again stress that just the public finance from the developed countries to the developing countries is not going to be sufficient, and we will have to have innovative sources of financing. We will have to send a very strong signal to the private sector to invest in low carbon, climate resilient development. We'll have to send a very strong signal to the MDBs to really move into that. Yeah. I think this will be a collective. But in order for others to really get that signal, unless we have that core really defined and that confidence is built on, then we are gradually maybe killing the Paris Agreement. And then I think I see that a very big race, but I'm very confident that a country like Germany will not let that happen in Baku.
And if I can just perhaps maybe put a picture in your mind here, when we talk about this, the emphasis for the public finance really underpinning all of this, picture like water flowing from a mountaintop as it streams down, going through all the crevices, watering all the plants along the way. That's the impact that this public commitment will really have. It will stimulate other countries as well to take up their responsibility. It will encourage private sector investment. So it's really at the core of all of this. And then we also have to make the point that there are places private sector just isn't going to make the money. There will be no returns for private sector funding in those cases, in those investments. And they cannot do that. Right, and particularly in the areas of loss and damage. So public money is going to be needed, and those commitments are ever the more important. Hamira, I'll come to you now, and Mr. Gorison, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Following on Raju's citing of the Paris Agreement, for me, my point of before I give my conclusion, my standing point is we need to phase out funding from the fossil fuel industry and divert that funding into climate finance and loss and damage. Because if we do not do that and we keep pouring money into fossil fuels, we are one day going to sit on this panel again and be discussing a different kind of funding that is not loss and damage, that is not climate finance, that is not adaptation. Someone I really respect once said, we have the loss and damage fund because we failed to contribute to the adaptation fund. And if we keep failing at all these, every step we go, we keep having excuses and excuses. That means 20, 15 years from now, we're going to be having another discussion, discussing about a new fund. And we can't keep discussing that if the core of the whole Paris Agreement and how to bring about climate justice and to make sure that we protect the environment is us, one, to stop polluting the environment. That means we stop investing in fossil fuels, we phase out of fossil fuels, and also we learn how to adapt, mitigate, and protect and deal with reparations in the infected countries. That being said, the question of where is the money going to come from is what I'm trying to answer is, we have seen that in 2022 alone, we had close to 700 something billion being invested in the fossil fuel industry, and yet it's the very industry that is affecting our ozone layer. It's a very industry that is bringing about the climate crisis and all these impacts we are facing. So if we actually sit down and be realistic, because every time, at least the word realistic has been mentioned on this panel, realistic. If we are going to be realistic, let us limit how much money we invest in the fossil fuel industry and move that money into climate change and climate finance, and making sure that communities actually develop, not by starting from fossil fuels like the Global North did, but by starting with renewable energy into developing from there. And yeah, I think that's...
Hey, Gorison.
Thank you. I'm a little bit in a difficult situation because I think many of the things you said, both of you, or including you, Jan, I don't really feel that this is fully appropriate to put on Germany's shoulder. And I also don't want to come into quoting phrases from the Paris Agreement, and I could also say a number of things on that. So let's not go in these kind of legalistic discussion. I agree that the Paris Agreement is a core fundamental agreement we are building on, and of course, you're absolutely right, Germany will not let it fall apart. But let me just repeat again, and I think I'm frustrated if I let that misunderstanding coming up. Germany and the European Union is by far not against a core role of public finance and climate finance, not at all. We fully understand that, recognize that. We are doing that. We did that over many years. We will continue to do that. We will take up again the leadership in doing that. And we have other partners among the contributing communities who are a little bit less clear about that than Germany and the European Union. And we fully buy also the argument that, as you described, like a waterfall or like a catalyst, that public climate finance has to play a role in facilitating investments coming in poorer countries, de-risking, buying down capital costs, also for mitigation. And I also said it already, you can't finance all adaptation activities with private finance. You can do a little bit more than we do right now. I think there's also a role for private sector, but of course, in particular in poorer and vulnerable countries, public grant-based finance has to play a key role for adaptation finance. I fully buy that. So don't please put me in a situation that I have to defend that we are not doing that. So that's really where we are. But let me really close by saying the NCQG discussions this year will only be successful, and that's also what we said in our submission, if we find a way. Although it's not a step change in quantum, you're right, Jan. If we come to agreement which includes those countries which call themselves still being a developing countries, but which are able to contribute substantially to public climate finance, that has to happen. If there's no way to get there, and therefore I really think it would be good to form a coalition or an alliance between poorer, vulnerable countries with us in order to address that, and not as a single issue topic. It's only one of the various elements of the NCQG. I also said that. But I think it's one element which we need, which is politically absolutely fundamental to be successful. As I described, the political situation in this country, but actually in all industrialized countries, is not that far away from Germany. We will not be able to mobilize more public finance if we don't find a solution on that end. And I think it's really also a question of fairness to ask those who are able to do so. And the funny thing is, and most of you know that they already do a South-South cooperation. But they're not talking about it, it's not transparent, it's not clear how you can access it, it's not exactly clear what they exactly do. So makes that clearer and makes it becoming part of the story. I think then we can make substantial steps forward, and then it's more easy to convince our finance ministries, our parliaments, etc., to mobilize more public finance.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the fight against tackling climate change, it's a multi-stakeholder effort. Everybody has to be involved, and I think it's fitting that we also open up the conversation to you all. I know you've been patiently listening to us, but this is the time to maybe take questions from the floor to be addressed to our panelists. I see Mr. Gorson doesn't want any more questions, but don't worry, he's here to take them, and we appreciate his being here this evening. So if I please raise those hands high, because I want to allocate you a number. So I saw your hand go up first, number 1, number 2, number 3, and there was another hand here, number 4. It's the ladies in the house today. So number 1, please raise up your hand, and maybe let's take those questions collectively. It would be helpful if you were to direct the question to a particular panelist to avoid too much replication. So yes, please, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. And my question is directed to Mr. Gorson. I'm Silke Bölz from Forum Faire Handel. And Mr. Gorson, I welcome that you want to build a coalition and an alliance of countries that put forward some money together. And I think that's a very wonderful idea. And I want to give you some of my idea how this could work. Like in Dubai, Germany has put 100 on the table, and Dubai did so as well. Why couldn't something similar like that not work this year as well. Like, for example, if the coalition of all the Singapore countries and the South Korea countries say, put some money on the table, and the European Union would say, okay, on that amount of money, we put 40% on top, or 60%, or whatever, it's just an example. And then the EU, maybe in its October resolution, would have said, okay, whatever amount of money that group of country puts on the table, we will put our amount on top, and that could be a percentage. And then it wouldn't be us again asking you for money, but then it would rather fighting for the 50 or 60% and fighting for the South Koreas and the Singapores to put money on the table. And I think this could build a bridge and shift the conversation, and it would convince the finance minister, and it would build a narrative for the German population as well, that it's not only us putting money on the table, but also the other countries. And it's a bit like going together. And
thank you.
Maybe you can tell me why you think it works or why it doesn't work. Thanks.
We even come with solutions, proposed solutions. It was worth your while being here today. Number 2, please.
I'm not sure if I was number 2. Okay.
You are now.
I also have 2 questions maybe to Mr. Garrison. I'm sorry. I'm Alena Dietl from SOS Children's Villages, and you were talking that we need new sources for finance, and maybe you're not the right addressee, but I was still interested in that. You mentioned that a wealth tax was discussed at G20, but I would like to know why it hasn't been implemented in Germany so far, and why the country hasn't taken the lead as a pioneer in this area, especially in light of budget cuts, particularly in the development sector. I think this is a topic that makes me personally really, really angry that we don't have that. And the other question is, really a short question, what are the reasons behind why exactly you don't want to have loss and damage included in the NCQG? Thank you.
And number 3, I think, was up front here. Yes, the lady in the front.
Yeah, my name is Rose Wanjiko. I come from Kenya, but here in Berlin I'm organizing with an organization called International Women's Space. And one of the things that we are trying to do is bring the conversation about migration to the reason why, to climate change, like climate change being one of the reasons why people are migrating. Because when we are talking about mitigation and adaptation, really, we keep, I don't know how we keep explaining about mitigation and adaptation and leave it and ignore the fact that when we talk about mitigation and adaptation, we are talking about communities. When we talk about loss and damage, we are talking about communities. So, I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I just will ask a few, because one of the things is
May I maybe propose that we just have 2, Max?
Yeah. So one of the things that you talked about is about the financing. You were saying that really you do not want Germany to take the responsibility, like they keep saying. But one of the things I know for a fact that Germany, for example, is investing in Namibia and in Kenya in renewable energy. And one of the things that this renewable energy is going to do is take the little resources like water. Water in both countries is very important, but when you say that you're providing finance to finance projects that really are taking the resources from the communities, then you say then at the same time you're financing adaptation and mitigation, then for me there, I lose you completely when you frame it like this.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we had a 4th hand.
Hello, good evening. I'm Susanne Ehlerding. I'm a climate reporter at Tagesspiegel. And I would like to stress that I agree that all countries have to do their share. Like, for example, China has caught up in historical emissions and per capita emissions. So why not China or the Emirates or oil producing countries would contribute to the finance? I would doubt what you say, that this would not make up for a lot of money. So I would like to know more about what are your estimates, or who calculated that. And also, I would like to have you, Mr. Garrison, please have us a little look into your kitchen, or how you would try to convince these donors to be on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you clarify who the first question was addressed to? The first question was addressed to? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Gorson, it's because you started the session by saying, don't ask me questions, that people precisely did the opposite. So okay, so I'll give you a moment now. I was also taking notes. I can support you in terms of reminding you of what some of the questions were.
I noticed the question. I didn't say, don't ask me question. I said, not only to me. There's 4 panelists. That's what I wanted to say. And at least there's a question to you, Jan. The matching idea, so the idea, we're putting something on the table, others come in, and we do it jointly, a little bit like what we did with the Loss and Damage Fund also with the Fund for Responding Loss and Damage, FRLD, a new acronym, which is now the official name, is something which we find very interesting, and we're discussing it, how, what and if we can do that. So that's what I can say, not further, but it's indeed a thing. The question, why did we not implement in Germany a wealth tax? Indeed, I'm not the right person to ask this question. But if you live in Germany, you should simply read newspapers, and you know why it is not in Germany. And look a little bit at the political landscape in Germany, why we are there where we are. Why not loss and damage in the NCQG? I have a legalistic answer here and a factual answer. The legalistic answer is the Paris Agreement, which simply does not include loss and damage finance in climate finance as it is defined in Article 9. So that's, I hated to make this kind of argument, but I think I need to say that right now. And also, and I said it earlier, loss and damage is not only in the responsibility of the developed countries, that even less than the traditional climate finance which we were talking about. So therefore, we need more sources for mobilizing finance for loss and damage. More contributors, but in particular also more sources. And there's a number of ideas to international levies, taxes, whatsoever, to be used to fuel the loss and damage fund. And we are in principle supportive of that, and there's work started already looking in this direction, how to identify those new sources. It will not happen from today to tomorrow, but we think that needs to be addressed in a broader sense than just in the NCQG. And then the question about the investment in Namibia and using water resources. You said, I can't go. I don't know the details of this investment. Just to say that, but I know that the people who are involved in that and the German government responsibles actually have, in agreement with the government of Namibia, are trying to exactly avoid that. And if that's still happening, I think it needs to be addressed to the responsible people who are active there. This is not the intention, what you said. If that's happening, then it's poor management, but it's exactly not the intention. What I know is that the water which should be used for producing hydrogen in that region should be from desalination, so new water, and that this desalinated water should not only be used for the new investment, but should also be used for the communities in that region. But I'm not in all the details of that, so don't go in the details. I'm not the expert for that. And I think the last question was more for you, Jan, than for me. You wanted to cook a sneak review in the kitchen. I don't give that to you. So I don't have the one sentence answer on that. We do a lot of diplomacy. We do a lot of outreach. Every day we have several meetings. Next week is the New York Climate Week and the ANGA. We will talk to everybody. So this is something we constantly are working on and trying to find a way and how to do that. There's not just the simple thing how it happens. And I'm not sure that we will succeed. So not today.
I take the liberty to quickly respond to a point about loss and damage. The legalistic argument, I don't buy that. That is what negotiators are there for. It's a political decision that ministers can absolutely make to say, we want loss and damage to be included in the NCUG because the needs in developing countries are so that we absolutely have to do that. We want to do that. And you negotiators sort out how we can make it work with the Paris Agreement without reopening it. You can solve that. We trust in you, but the political steer is this must be included because that's the third pillar of the Paris Agreement. That's a dramatically increasing need in developing countries. We don't want to leave these people out high and dry. So do it. So it can be done. If the political will is there, it can be done. There's no doubt about that. Okay, on the other question, sorry that I had to take that because anyway, on the other question, that's what I said, or when I said what I meant, I wouldn't name particular countries, and I wouldn't be able here now to say what are the indicators, from what moment on should a country consider itself in a position to contribute to climate finance. But the principal point is there to say it's a matter of climate justice, of course, that works in many ways, and also in the way that you say if a country has achieved their responsibility for causing the crisis, through past and present emissions, but not only to present emissions, we need to look into the history of emissions, of course, as well, and the economic or financial capacity to contribute, or that is comparable to, say, Annex II countries. Why not expect this country to also contribute in a comparable manner? Not that it would also all of a sudden bring up hundreds of billions of dollars, but I mean, they could start, they can see, okay, I'm now in a position that's now comparable to where Annex II countries were in 1992 in relation to the world. Yeah, absolutely. The difficult part, or there's two problems with, or two issues with that, not problems. One is this discussion, as far as I sense it, is often perceived as an attempt by developed countries to diffuse their obligations they have and their responsibilities. And that makes lots of countries unhappy to think about it because they fear this is just one way to get away from the responsibilities they have. And I'm not judging on that. I'm only reporting what I think is the perception of some. And of course, others would say, and whichever way you want to do it, you need to do it consistent with the Paris Agreement, and that is of course very tricky because you don't, and that's again speaking to the first part, you don't want to diffuse the responsibilities of developed countries, which I sense is at least part of why there's so much resistance. But the principal point, yeah, find language in the NCUG that would allow these countries to do that in accordance with, say, Article 9.2 that says other countries are encouraged to do so on a voluntary basis. But don't try to reopen that part of the Paris Agreement. And yeah.
Right. Raju, you wanted to respond?
Yes. Well, there was no question for me directly, but I just wanted to react to some of the comments here. Well, first, I think we'll have to acknowledge that the Article 8 of the Paris Agreement is all about loss and damage. If we talk about the loss and damage as in the context of the Paris Agreement, then it is clearly laid out there. That is one of the pillars that we'll have to take into action. That is in the agreement. But at the same time, let's just not look at the Paris Agreement, but also look at the impacts that is happening on the ground at the moment. If the glaciers, are melting in the Himalayas, do we not account that or as a slow onset events as a part of the climate problem or not? If the small island countries are going underwater, do we not take that very seriously or not? I think that it's a very fundamental moral question to really ask to ourselves to say that these impacts, whether it's a fast onset extreme events or slow onset events leading to the people's mass movement and the problem, do we really acknowledge that or not? But no, but I do agree to you that addressing loss and damage or addressing climate change is just not developed countries' responsibility. That you're right. In fact, developing countries are paying a lot more than what the developed countries have provided in terms of taking climate action currently. I talked about the, sorry? Even like for my own country, has been addressing loss, like when the impacts, all the floods are happening, all these droughts are taking place, forest fires. It's not all the time the developed countries have been putting resources and say, okay, no, we'll help you with that. Though it's been very much linked to climate change. They have been cutting down, they are doing what they can do, whether they cut down with other development needs, but there are already efforts that's taking place. I think that has to be acknowledged. And there's also a huge amount of resources, in fact, not just flowing from the developed country to the developing country, but a huge resource flowing from the developing country to the developed country. Look at every year the kind of debt servicing that we do in terms of capital and the interest that we are paying. So there is this whole issue about who pays for that. I agree with you that the fair share is a big issue among the developed countries themselves as well, and that has been acknowledged. But if I were to be in US or in Canada, I would be saying the same thing that I'm doing because I'm here in Germany. I'm talking to you in that perspective. Right? That fair share is a big issue that not all developed countries have contributed to that. But also, what needs to be really acknowledged is, you might say that certain emerging or bigger economies have to come in this and that. But for a country like mine, or for a group of countries like where I work with, when two elephants struggle or fight, whether they play or whether they fight, is the grass that gets crushed. And we feel that pain, that's what's happening to us. And that is something that we'll have to put things in perspective. Because if that is not put in perspective, then who suffers? Who is going underwater? Where the impacts are happening? What is happening with their communities? Because again, this links to the loss and damage, and our colleague from Kenya raised that migration. If you see in a short term, it may be that you're investing a lot. But if you look from a long-term perspective, then it's also in the interest of a country like Germany to invest and really provide the public finance. Because if you see you're not taking sufficient climate action, it means more migration, more conflict, more where the pressure comes. Again, the pressure also comes to a country like Germany. So I think we'll have to see not just in a very what happens in the next 4 years or 5 years, but in looking into a long term is very essential.
And Raju, while you're still holding the mic up, if you could perhaps in 30 or so seconds, just tell us about what your expectations are ahead of COP29 in Baku. We're weeks away from that. And this will be your closing remark.
Yes, I mean, there are 3-4 things that has to be very clearly outlaid in the NCQZ agreement in the Paris, in Baku. When I say that, one, the fundamentally agreeing on the quantum is very essential, and primarily looking at the public finance. What level of public finance really is being agreed in Baku will bring the confidence, as I said earlier, and it's a trust builder in really moving forward with climate action. That's one. But just what I have also learned in the past with the implementation of the 100 billion is just having quantum is not sufficient. The qualitative aspect of climate finance is also equally important. What kind of resources are going? Is it going in the form of grants or loans? Is the countries that are accessing have the ability to really access those resources or not? The modality of access is very key element. Are there requirements and preconditions put forward to access that resources or not? Is a very fundamental part. So many of the countries, access is a big issue. So we'll have to work on that, not just putting numbers, but also access part.
Right.
But and I think I'll just stop with that two major elements.
And Jan, from your perspective, we're weeks away from Baku. What would you like to see happen there?
Following on from what Raju says, the public finance element is core. 10 times as much or not, I leave that open for now. But the answer COP29 needs to give needs to be responding to the needs in developing countries. So I leave it out there like that. And that includes for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. So we can't go without that. We can't Baku leaving without that. There's a number of additional aspects that I want this NCQG also to help. I want this NCQG to help us shifting the trillions, shifting financial flows in general. So we are totally in agreement on that. I also want that as an important component, including a shopping list, or let's say not a shopping list, including a work plan or something. How are we going to do that together, collectively and individually? I also want that. And because we didn't say that at all yet, I also want to look at the architecture of the goal of the NCQG. I want an NCQG that will be adjusted and revised over time, especially if we don't have the political will to do the step change that we need. We need a reopening and an adjustment review of this and see how can we improve this after 5 years, after a number of years, or some people talk about after 10 years. I see that developing countries asking for that as well, for a cycle of review and adjustment.
Right.
I don't see that in the developed country submissions yet. But maybe we shouldn't forget about the architecture. So if we get a deal that is, let's say, acceptable to everyone, it may still not be a good deal. And if we have a review and ratchet up mechanism that would allow us to improve over time, I think that's a key ingredient as well.
Mr. Gorson?
I would first say COPs are always successful if there are coalitions or alliances which bridge between the two big communities, developing countries on the one hand and developed countries on the other. And so that is absolutely crucial. So therefore, that's why I hate to talk very generally about the needs of developing countries or what developing countries need or what problems they have. Developing countries is a really very, very big variety of very different economies and countries, and that needs to be addressed. And there are very poor and very vulnerable countries which really need all kind of support, in particular public grants, but there are others where the situation is completely different, which can contribute with that. So my first point is really finding ways to bridge between these two groups. The worst thing which could happen is have a unified G77 against the unified classical developed country groups, and we will not succeed. So we need to bridge. Second thing is the NCQG, as I said, needs to be fit for purpose. So it needs to address the needs of developing countries, and it needs to have many qualitative elements, including those which you have named, but a number of more. It needs to mobilize the investments. And of course, on the second hand, it needs to be have a call based on the floor of the 100 billion, but is also realistic in order to achieve. If we agree to a number which is not realistically politically achievable, then we are also in a problem. So we come out of the climate bubble in Baku, and we get hit down here in our countries, in our parliaments, and we will never reach what we have agreed upon. That's not helpful for nobody. So therefore it needs to be realistic, and we need to understand what is realistic. And I'm of course a part of the group who wants to raise the number as much as possible, just to say that. And my third point is really Baku needs to be a COP which is not only about finance. I need to say that very, very clearly. We will manage climate change not with climate finance, not with adaptation, not with funding for loss and damage. We will only address climate finance if we also make more progress on mitigation, on addressing emissions. And I'm very concerned that so far the focus of also of the incoming presidency is too much only on finance. I spent all the time here this evening to talk with you about the NCQG. We know that this is a big subject which has to happen. I don't want to undermine that, but at the same time, we also have to have very clear signals that more ambition is needed, that more action has to be done, that the NDCs which have to be put forward in this period get a clear direction from Baku for more ambition. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the temperature goals to keep 1.5 in reach. And if we are not able to keep 1.5 in reach, then we are really in trouble with loss and damage, adaptation, and climate finance.
Amira, the last word to you, and perhaps even the least time.
Thank you. I have had so many things, and so much is going through my mind. But the truth is, for the Global South, or for the least developed countries, and for Africa in general, it will make so much sense if climate finance is provided and loss and damage finance is provided. Then once we have finances to deal with the reparations, and we have climate finance to deal with adaptation and mitigation, it will be very easy for us to then deal with mitigation and invest in more renewable energy to actually encourage the people in our country to actually now decide to go in the line of more renewable energy and use renewable energy, instead of us starting with stop using fossil fuels and use this without us providing the climate finance. That being said and done, just to also ease you a bit, is I or myself, we tell this to every Global North country delegate that we get to meet, because we are in the process of saying one by one makes a bundle. So today we are in Germany, tomorrow he'll be in the US also doing the same thing. So do not feel bad, we just need you to be on board in Baku. Now that being said, as we go to Baku, we should remember that we are representing millions and millions, if not, we are now billions of people who are already affected by the climate crisis. And while we negotiate and while we bring all we have on board and fight whatever side we're fighting on, we should remember that there is people that no longer have homes. There's people who have lost their children, who have lost their parents, who have lost their sources of income, and who now are climate refugees, like my sister from Kenya said, people who who are not sure about how they'll wake up tomorrow because they slept when their house is dry, and tomorrow they may wake up in a flood. These are the people we're going to represent in Baku. Much as negotiations can be a turmoil, we cannot let them blind us to make us forget about these people. We should also remember that inaction is a very dangerous state for those particular people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers this evening for coming out and engaging in this discussion. I think this gives us a sense of where we're at as a global community ahead of this COP summit, and where we still need to close the gap, and the hard work that we all still have to do as the different stakeholders in this effort. Raju, Hamira, Mr. Gorson, Jan, thank you so much. And I think we've got a nice reception that's prepared outside, so we can continue the conversation. Yeah, let's keep this conversation going. And we'll be back soon, hopefully with a good report after Baku. Thank you very much.